Hi, Jez Park here for another exciting journey through the world of PBR Painter and Blender. So tonight I will be walking you through the steps it took to texture and surface this particular toolbox. It's a very straightforward object, as you can see. Just a kind of a box with a few bit of detail here. I've probably spent a day modelling it. And there's a few things actually about it we should know beforehand before we get started. As usual, there is always a necessary UV map. In this case, actually, I have made two UV maps. This one here, which is really for primarily surfacing the actual tin, the main part of the toolbox. And this one here, UV map handle, which is for the actual handle itself, which I needed to have a bit more detail on, but when we actually bake it down, we will be baking it back down to the previous UV map, which is so basically it will be one UV together. I just found it easier to work on a higher UV map here, get a bit more detail in it when I come to the handle than when it was like this. The other thing, whilst we're talking about the handle, is currently the handle is lying down on its side, but that is a shape key, and when we'll actually be modelling it, or texturing it should I say, we're going to have it set at its value basically straight up. That way it won't create any dark patches, you know, when we use the some of the masking tools, and then we can lie it down once it's finished. So that was just a kind of little extra for me. And here we are in the actual interface, the PBR Painter interface, and there are actually two materials that I've dedicated to PBR Painter. The other two, actually handle metal and handle stuffing, are just the kind of metal bits in here, and they don't really warrant surfacing, I don't think, but I'll leave that to you, so I'll include this file, so if you want to surface it you can. But if we look at the toolbox, for example, that's the main toolbox here, you'll see there are 7 layers, and there's a lot there, and I've kind of gone over the top with it, and I've done things like I put a decal on there, which we probably don't need, but you could put like a different decal on. I've just included it just to show how it's done. Of course, all of this is well demonstrated on Will's PBR YouTube channel. So if you've got any questions or any ideas about how the whole thing works, there's a very detailed breakdown on his channel. But if I go through these one by one, you'll see kind of what we're looking at doing today. So starting with the base one, in fact let me turn everything off. So here we are starting with the base tin, and we start with the what I've called Musgrave rust, and it's just a kind of spattering of rust all over. The next one is noise rust, so it's kind of the same sort of thing, but with this one I've actually made an image, painted an image texture on here, which when we come to doing it, you'll see how easy it is to create this effect where you can create patches of rust just where you want them to be, and it's a really useful trick, very simple to do as well. You don't have to be a very good artist like me to do it. And no, what I meant was, you don't have to be a very good artist like me, who's not a very good artist, to do this. There you go. I wasn't blowing my own trumpet then. And the next one I've just called Rust Dave, and this one here actually is the rust that Will did in his rust tutorial. So if you want a really good breakdown on this one, and then pop over to the YouTube channel and have a good look. So there's the combination of 3 different rusts, and it gives generally what I think is a fairly decent looking rust. They're quite comprehensive. The next one is the dirt crevices, and this is just the actual kind of darkness in the crevices where the dirt might collect. And the next one, of course, is scratches, usual scratches on the sort of over time that the tin might get. From there we've got the decal, which is the kind of painted decal. We'll show you how to do that. And then the final one, which is a dust layer, which I've actually only using ever so slightly. And so if I take that right up, you'll see it's kind of very dusty, or just a little bit dusty, or not dusty at all. And so I'll put that back to where it was. So that's the toolbox. Then if we look at the handle, the leather handle, it's not dissimilar in as much as there's a lot of layers. And then we'll just go back to the very first layer. So the very first layer is a basic leather texture, nothing to write home about there. It's using the active UV map, which I'll come to more of this when we actually do it. The active UV map, of course, is the one which is highlighted. So it's this UV map it's using here, but it's not a big deal if you don't use the active one. You could actually use the UV map handle. It's just you need to change the settings on the actual scale, etc., to get the kind of same look. The next layer is what I have called stitching, which is just this stitching here. It's a bit bright actually, I might take that down, but this really is a demonstration of how to use the paintbrush with some of the other tools, namely kind of like a line tool which is dotted, and it gives quite a nice stitching effect, and that's really the main reason I've done that. But I think it's a bit new, it needs to be toned down a bit. Having said that, once we've added a few extra bits like the edge wear, this one here really is the one which makes it look very ancient and cracked, and once again it looks more complicated than it actually is, this one. It's quite simple to achieve this if you know what you're doing, of course, and it actually took me a while to achieve it, but once I achieved it I actually realised it's actually quite a simple process. So we move on from there, and we've got handle dirt, which is basically just sort of kind of extra dirt in the crevices, and then finally we've actually added the dust. Now the good thing about the dust, of course, is that it uses a geometric mask, which is a normal direction. So when we actually change the handle, where are you? Here. When we change it to down, the dust actually will sit on the top, regardless of where the angle is, if you know what I mean. So that's it. So what we'll do now is we will move over to a new scene and get started and work through each of these layers one by one, just to show you how I have achieved these. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with this toolbox here, this main toolbox material here. So we click on the actual toolbox, and where it says set up material for PBR, click on that. Ignore the backup material, don't need to do that. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually set up, I'll tell you what I need to do first, change my preview mode. You won't see anything if you're in the wrong mode, and so here we're going to set our base color. So we'll make this a kind of sort of light grey color. We'll make it metallic, and let's take the roughness down so it gives it a bit of shine, something like that. That will do. And let's start by creating our first rust layer. The very first one is going to be called Musgrave Rust, because we're going to be using the Musgrave procedural to make it. Let's click the refresh material, not that we need to, but you can see that we actually have this refresh material, which sometimes I forget to press, and I'm thinking, why isn't nothing I'm doing working? If that's happening, you need to refresh the material. We're going to use all of the top four here to basically create our first rust. So we're going to use the colour, the metal, the roughness, and the normal. The colour, the metal, and the roughness are all going to be link to mask. So we'll do those straight away. And the normal, where in the old version of PBR we used to use the same link to mask, but you'll notice it's deprecated, I think that's how you pronounce that, and instead we've got this layer bump which does the same thing. So you can still use that, it seems to work exactly the same way, and we'll just actually explain a little bit more about this layer bump in his tutorials. So it's linked to mask, and so we need a mask, and our mask is going to be a procedural mask, and guess what, it's going to be a Musgrave texture, and we're just going to change the Musgrave to multi-fractal. And let's change these settings. These are the settings I've already used and I know they work. So 1.3, 15 for detail, dimension can actually go down to 0, and everything else is pretty much the same. If we refresh material here, we'll see this is what it looks like, and at the moment our rust is white and flat and it doesn't look very rusty at all. So we need to change our colours. So if we come over to the colour option here, for colour tab, or whatever you call this, colour mode, there you go, colour mode. Someone tell me what they're called. And so here, let's change our colours. So the colours I'm currently using are, I've got them all written down here. So instead of black, we're going to use a hex value of 271C10, 271C10, or here's our RGB, and basically it's just ever so slightly a very, very dark red. The white at the top here, instead of being white, we're going to make that a grey colour, and the hex value for that is going to be 7F 7C 7A, and we're going to move that ever so slightly down to approximately, once again, none of these have to be exactly like this. This is kind of just what I played around with, but you can definitely change these to your heart's content, something like that. And then we're going to make a third one here, and this one here is going to be at 0.477, and the color hex value is going to be 6F4F34, and that will give us this rust color. But it's not looking quite as rusty, it's not looking quite as saturated as it needs to be. So we've got this mask multiplier here, and I'm going to whack that all the way up to 30, and suddenly you'll see that we start to get this nice kind of dark looking rust. It's probably a little bit dark, but if we do the same with our mask multiplier for metal, and I think roughness is probably okay. And then the final one is norm here, and this actually really helps to bring this out, this rust out. And we need to click on this layer bump here, and then just take the layer bump strength right down to 0.94. The roughness, let's invert the colours, and there we go, that's better, but it's very shiny, so we don't want it to be this shiny. So let's take the black and let's make it a lot lighter. Let's make it kind of a lightish grey, something like that, and there we go. That looks like our first layer done. So our next layer is going to be called noise rust, and we'll leave everything else as default, standard and filled. Okay, we're going to be using color, metal, roughness and normal again, and we're going to be making a mask. Actually, before we do that, let's just, for the color, let's turn this to link to mask, and I want to if I refresh the color now, if I refresh it, you'll see that everything is white, but I'd actually like us to see the actual color before I make the mask. And so once again, I've got a setup. I've got 4 nodes, if you like, here, so I'm going to just set them up in the places they go. So the first one we'll leave at black. The second one here we'll put at 0.179, and we'll make that a hex value of 392814. The next one along we will put at 0.674 with a hex value of 50381D, and then the last one here, the white one, currently white one, we'll just pull that down to 0.873, and we'll change that to a hex value of 7E5931, and we're actually going to link it to the mask, which we haven't created yet. So I think the best thing is to actually make the mask first, and we're going to make a procedural mask first, just so we can kind of see what our noise, if you like, looks like, our colors and metals, etc. So it's a very simple noise mask. If you haven't guessed, it's a procedural. Click OK, and the settings in the procedural settings will be 21.5, 15 for detail, roughness 0.737, and distortion, we'll leave that at 0. Let's refresh the material, and I'm just going to turn the Musgrave rust off so we can see what it's starting to look like. And it's just very subtle at the moment, so what we need to do is we need to change our color ramps and really squeeze these up, and the way we do that is literally just pull them in like so, .440 I've actually put this one at, and the white one at 0.586. So we've really squeezed those, and if we go back over to the color and we take the mask multiplier up to 2.3, start to see our kind of speckling rust going on. And so we need to finally do a couple of extra, but we'll link the roughness to the mask as well, and we'll go to the norm as well, and instead of linking this to the mask, doing the layer bump, we'll just actually, I'm just going to play with this and do a procedural of my own, and we'll leave it a noise. Let's take the scale up to 7.3, the detail up to 15, the roughness 0.653, and then the procedural color ramp we'll leave as it is, and we'll click on layer bump, and you can see already what's starting to happen. Let's take that layer bump strength right down to 0.275, and let's invert those colors. The procedural bump strength, let's take that down to 0.568, 67, refresh material, and I think that's looking pretty good for what we need. I'd like a bit more, like it to be a bit more bumpy than it is. I think if we take the metallic up, in fact let me just have a look and see what I've done. Oh yes, 0.697, there we go, and that gives this, makes it look a bit more contrasty. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And so there's our kind of procedural rust, but I don't want it all over, I just want it in the corners, kind of like on the clasps and the kind of corners of the actual box itself. So to do that, what we'll do is we'll make another mask, but this mask is going to be a image texture. So we can click on the image texture, go OK, and we'll go new, and we'll call this noise rust mask. We'll make it, if I select both those together, I can do them both at the same time. We'll make it 4K and 32-bit float. Always works quite well, especially with normals. Click OK, and now we're ready to paint on our mask. And so click on the paint option here, and it will be white is the colour we want to paint on, and we're just going to paint in these areas here. Let me refresh that material, and you'll see that as I'm painting now, I'm just painting the rust in those corners, which works really well. So we have got it all over still, which kind of, I actually didn't do this on the last one, but I quite like that kind of rustness all over of it. It's a bit overkill. So what I am actually going to do, I'm actually going to just swap these masks and bring that one down, and my procedural mask I'm going to change it to multiply. Refresh the material, and now what we'll see happening is, hopefully, just on the edges, we're just getting it where I'm starting to paint. So let's go back to my image texture, still on my paint mode, and as I paint you will see, I've got to be careful here actually, because it'll only paint what you see. So if I didn't really want it to be there, so I'm just going to rub that out. So you kind of got to get the angle of painting right. Let's make it white again, and let's take the size of my brush up ever so slightly. And I kind of can just do what I want, and I think we can play with the noise texture afterwards. And so it's a case of just painting on the bits where you know you want extra rust. So normally it's kind of where it's got wet and moisture's collected, that sort of thing, where there's some possible kinks in the metal. A procedural mask, I'm just going to play with it a little bit more before I'm finished with my painting, and the procedural mask at the moment is blend factor 50, but I'm actually going to take that up to 100 to a 1, and so now this painting I'm doing on my image texture is only going to kind of come where the black parts of the procedural noise texture are, and it looks a lot more natural now and gives me a better idea of what I want it to look like. And so really this is up to you. If you want more or less kind of broken cornered rust, then it's really up to you to decide how much or how little you want to do. So I'm just going to kind of fast forward through this bit. It doesn't take very long anyway. And what's so good about this, of course, is that it is not set in stone. You can always go back and kind of erase some bits, or not set in metal, shall I say. So you can kind of rejig it to your heart's content, and you can add more or less, take it away, and it's not the end of the world if you don't get it right the first time. But what's nice about this, of course, is it working like it is. It works quite well. In fact, let's just do white again, but let's just, instead of doing white, let's just do a kind of lesser white. You'll notice that, of course, if you're not getting it quite so bright, you're not going to get quite so much of the texture. So you can kind of fade it in a bit more, so it doesn't look quite so. Be careful not to go over stuff, because if you go over it, of course, you're going to lose what you've just done. So this is kind of like an extra. But even this, to a certain extent, isn't necessary, because if we add it to the original one we've just done, wait for it to refresh, and there you can see that we're starting to get the combination of the two. Let's just pop that back to white. And what's nice is we've kind of got an overall spattering of rust, but we can control kind of like areas where we want it to be really rusty, like where the water damage is quite bad. And so I'm going to call it a day on that second layer, and that is our noise rust layer complete. So now we're on to our next layer of rust. Just by the by, this paint is still active, so if you click onto procedural mask, for example, it won't be active anymore until you come back to this. But just bear in mind, if you just wanted to deactivate it, just click on the paint button. So let's add another layer, and let's call this Rust A, for want of a better name. Now this is almost the same as the tutorial that Will has on the latest version of PBR, and it's I think it's episode 1 where he actually creates rust, and whilst it's not exactly the same, it's quite similar. So if you want a more of a probably an in-depth tutorial with a better explanation from Will, then head on to the PBR Painter YouTube channel and you'll see that tutorial there. So with this one we're going to go colour, metal, roughness and norm. Then we go to the colour, we're actually going to use a procedural setting, and for the procedural settings we are going to use, well, the detail actually we're going to change to 9, and the roughness we're going to change to 0.78. Let's turn these two off so we can get a better idea of what it looks like. So we've kind of got this just very grey procedural going on, so we're going to need to change these colours. So this first one here we're going to slide up to 0.497, and we're going to change the hex value to 400B07. Going to add another node here, or whatever you call these things, and we're going to leave that at 0.564 with a hex value of 5A211E. I know I've said this before, but these are only just my kind of messing around values, so you don't have to use them if you don't want to. By all means use your own. This last one here, the white one at the end, we're going to change that hex value to A08A16, and there we've got this quite nice kind of rusty look going on. Let's move over to the metal settings, and we're going to link that one to mask. I know we haven't got a mask at the moment, but we will do. And whilst we're here, that metal one, we were actually going to make the mask multiplier up, but we don't, because we don't actually have a mask at the moment. That's not here, but we'll come back to that in a minute. The roughness, we're going to leave that constant, but let's just take that up to, that's like a more rough, it's kind of a rough version, more matte version. And then finally the normal, we are going to also kind of link it to the mask by clicking on the layer bump here, and we're going to combine the normals, so we keep the normals underneath. In fact, I don't think I did that on that one, so I'm just going to click on there, go over to normal, combine normals, so they all come through. Let's come back to this, fresh material, and now we just need to make our procedural mask. So let's add a mask, let's make it procedural, click OK, and our procedural settings are, we'll leave it at the noise, and we'll take the noise right down to 1.6, the detail up to 10, and the roughness up to 0.950, and let's refresh the material, and we just need to squeeze the colours. In fact, let's turn the mask on and let's just squeeze these colours. So what I want to do is just create this kind of quite nice bright black and white high contrast look, something like that. And then if we click off stack now, you'll see that we've got this kind of rust coming through, and we just need to work on our multipliers. So for example, the mask multiplier for the colour is 1 at the moment, but we really need that to be a lot more saturated, so let's take that up to 25. That's looking a lot better. The metal as well, we'll take that up to 20, and the roughness, same again, mask multiplier 20, and then finally the norm, we'll take that just a little bit higher to 3, and we've got this really nice looking rust there. That looks excellent, really pleased with that. And so that's it for our third layer. So the combination of all these works really well together, but it's not that you have to have one or the other. You could just, if you chose, you might find that in and of itself is just what you need, or maybe the first one and the third one. Let's wait for it to refresh. That looks pretty good too. They all look pretty good, but I'm just kind of demonstrating various different methods of creating rust. And so with that done, we'll move on to the dirt and the crevices. For our next layer, we're just going to add some dirt in the crevices, and it's a very simple process. In fact, Will has done a preset mask for this. So let's click on new layer. I'm calling this one Grunge. I think I called it dirt crevices in the last one, but Grunge will be fine. And we'll just make it a kind of a blackish colour for now. You could, if you wanted to, make it procedural. And let's look at the actual mask. If I click on the eyedrop here, and so dirt is invariably dark, so we need to get rid of the white, but let's have a little bit of contrast between the dark and the light. So that's our dirt colour, and so essentially I just need to make a mask here, and Will has done a preset mask here called Grunge, which works really well. Now you'll notice it needs cycles, so currently we're in EV, so I click on OK, go to cycles, and we need to go to the actual previewer here, the actual render view, click on mask, and you'll see straight away we've got this quite nice mask that's been set up for us. The only thing is it doesn't work in EV, so we have to bake it down. So we bake to image texture here, and then we can use it in virtual real time if you like. But just before we do that, you have got a few options here: noise, roughness, samples, distance, etc. But it's just a subtle addition really, so I think it's perfect just as it is. So we go bake to image texture. I'm going to make that 2K. It doesn't have to be high quality because it's just dirt. And click OK. And now just need to wait for that to bake. And I'm just going to pause the video while that is baking. And so now that's baked, we can go back to the EV preview mode if you like, and you'll see that this is the baked mask here, and you can still kind of dial up the colours or dial down the colours to a certain extent, and of course you can use the mask multipliers here. So let's turn off the actual mask itself, wait for it to refresh, and if we just dial it down, see, it's not making a lot of difference, is it? So let's take the mask multiplier right up, and you can see in the corners just as I'm taking it up, I think probably about 20 is okay, and if we dial that down, you can see what it's doing. It just helps to really bring out the dark areas Great, so that's the grunge layer done. So our next layer, we are going to use another preset that Will has included in this particular version of PBR Painter, and it's a scratches preset, which actually works pretty well, especially when you combine it with all the other layers that we have. So I've created a new layer, called it scratches. I'm just going to turn colour white on for now, because actually it works quite well just to see it with white, and then we can work on some of the other ones. So when we go to add a new mask, we click on add new mask and we go to the preset option and look for scratches. Click OK, and there we can see our mask already looks pretty good. I think I quite like that. And you've got a choice, some options to change the length of the scratches and the scratch thickness, but I think it looks pretty good as it is. Let's just see if I can play around with the location a little bit. These ones here, I'd quite like them it's a bit higher, so let's just lift them up on the Z. There you go, that's better. Yeah, excellent, I like those. So if we go a little bit closer, you can see that they're just white overlaid. So if we do a normal as well, and we click on layer bump, now we're actually starting to bump this here, and I think we just need to invert it a little bit and possibly I think that looks pretty good as it is. I quite like that. Those scratches, they look pretty good. Let's just turn the colour off for a moment. So those scratches, they are there, but I think they need to be see, I've gone the wrong way. That's what it is. They need to be sort of deeper here, and let's multiply the mask by say 3. There we go, that's better. Let's put colour back on, and let's do roughness as well, and let's make that kind of scratches tend to be quite rough, don't they? Yeah, there we go. I think that looks pretty good. We'll leave that as it is. So that is our scratches layer done. So our next layer is going to be a decal layer, and rather than use the PBR Painter kind of logo, which I did in the previous at the beginning of this video, I thought we'd just use like a sticker of decal. And so I looked on the internet and I found like a warning sticker, usual kind of white and black one, which we're going to use today. So to do this, you need to make sure you have a painted layer as opposed to a fill layer. Make it 4K, go OK, and you'll notice it's already set up as a painted layer, which is really nice. So, and the colour mode is selected as well, and so all we need to do is go to brush texture, click on the drop down here, click on new, and I've already loaded the image, so we need to make sure that the mapping is set to stencil and it's image or movie, and we'll go to the actual image itself, which is here somewhere, caution label, but you would just go on to click open, and so here it is. And then the final thing we need to do is make sure it's on clip, so you're only getting one version of it. And then as soon as you go onto your window, you'll see here, I've been playing with it a little bit, you can see your sticker stencil, and if you hold the right mouse button down you can move it around. If you hold the control button and the right mouse, then you can rotate it, and if you hold the shift and the right mouse button you can zoom in and zoom out. So we're going to stick this on in a few places. I think somewhere like there will be good. I'm not going to make a great job of it, I'm sure, but something like that. So once you've got it in the place, you just start painting, and what I need to make sure is that the paint is white, which it is, Okay, that should be painting now. Paint, paint, brush, paint. It was on erase alpha. Sorry, I had it on erase alpha by accident. So if that happens and it's not painting, it could be because you've clicked on erase alpha as opposed to paint. And let's paint. There we go. Okay, so there's one. Looks pretty good. Let's put another one over here. Just make it a bit bigger. And let's, for the sake of, actually you can see what's happened there. You see it's starting to look like warped, and I didn't quite get it right, so I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to put it into orthographical mode, because you get a kind of much better idea what you're painting on. And what I want to do is I want this surface here and this surface here to be pretty much kind of level with the camera, so it's not, I'm not getting too much distortion, and I'm not going to do a great job, but that's better. And then what we'll do is we'll just stick one. Let's stick one on this end here. Just rotate it. There we go. What you could do is, if you wanted to make them look like they were worn, you could add another layer here, like a procedural layer. So if we do that now, and straight away you can see they're starting to wear out. It's kind of like look like they're kind of semi-transparent in places, which probably we don't want, but we could kind of like put holes in them if you like. So let's just enable that mask just to preview it, and what we want is kind of like just kind of little black and white areas that will cut through our labels to make them look a bit raggedy. That's the plan anyway. So let's turn the mask off and let's invert these. I'm just going to drag these around so that okay, that's not too bad. Probably a bit overkill. I just want a tiny bit of wear. Yep, that will do me, and I'm quite happy with that. That looks pretty good. And so there is our decal layer. So our final layer for this toolbox is a dust layer, and I'm just going to turn off some of these layers just to make the computer a bit quicker. So new layer, let's call this dust, and let's make it filled. Click OK, and we'll go to color just to start off with, and we'll make this a procedural layer. And our procedural settings, actually you can pretty much leave them as they are, but we'll just change the color. So instead of having a kind of a white color, we'll make it slightly dirty. The hex value AAA AAA 090 AAA 090, and it's kind of this kind of very kind of muddy, dusty color, but you can make that whatever color you fancy. It can be white if you like. And so what we want to do is we want to create a mask whereby we're only seeing, it's really only kind of resting on the top of our object. And of course there is a great mask for this, and it's in the geometric option. So you click OK and then drop down to normal direction, and you've got this great, let's just put it on the actual mask on so we can see it, great option, so that actually you can see already it's just sitting right on top of our box. There you go, there's our dust. So it's a bit uniform. So the next thing we need to do is actually just add another mask to it, and we'll make this a procedural mask. And that procedural mask, let's just change a few of the settings of it. Let's change the scale to 6.9, the detail to 9.3, the roughness I've got 3.434, so we've got something like that. which looks pretty good. And if we do the stack here, if I take that right down, you'll see we just kind of want it like showing through, like so, maybe a bit more. That scale needs to go up a bit more. I think that looks better. Maybe take it down just a little. It needs to be quite subtle. That looks pretty good. And let's turn the stack off. And you can't really see it like it is, but let's just change a few. Let's add metal to it. Roughen the metal 0, by the way. The roughness as well, we'll just make that, we'll take that right up, and then the norm, we'll just combine the normals and just multiply it. So it gives it a little bit of oops, it's probably a bit too much. Take that layer bump strength right down. Turn the mask multiplier back to 1. Okay, and I think that should work quite well. If I turn all the other layers back on now, we should see our dust looking quite dusty. There we go, and that looks pretty good. I quite like that dust. It's too much. This is without and with, and I think something like that just makes it look a little bit more believable, older. And I think we'll leave it there. I mean, we could kind of add some more dents to it, I think, but maybe I'll do that before the end. But for now, let's leave the toolbox, or otherwise we'll be here forever. So having done our main toolbox, now we're going to concentrate on the leather handle here. And whilst I do that, I'm going to just turn off all of these layers for the toolbox, just to help speed things up a little bit. And now if we select the leather handle, and we're basically starting from scratch again, just remember, whilst we're working on this, I know I will talk about it again, but there are 2 UV maps in here, and currently the active one is the UV map, but we have this UV map handle here, and we need to make sure that we're using that one for this particular handle and not the other one. So let's set up our material. So the first one is just going to be the plain leather. We don't need to back up our material. So let's click on new layer, and let's call this leather. Standard field. Okay. And we haven't used it yet, but we're going to use the tool shortcuts here, which allows us to add all the textures we need of a PBR texture, which we're going to load. So click on here. I've already got some textures downloaded, and I'll put a link to where I got them from online. They're freely available online. And once again, if we refresh material, we'll now see what it's looking like. And for this one, although I did say we needed to use the other UV map handle, on my previous one I didn't. I just changed the scale slightly, but I think actually by changing it to UV map handle gives us a better look without actually having to work too hard. So there's our leather, and that's our first layer done. So this next layer is a little bit more trickier, and it's this stitching. We're going to add stitching on the leather here, the top of the leather handle. To do that, let's just turn the leather off, because we're trying to make things a bit quicker. But the base colour at the moment, the default colour of our material is white, so we just need to change that. So if you click on the layers button at the top here and change the base color to something a lot darker, then when we paint white, we'll be painting a white mask, then you will see it. So let's create a new layer, and this layer we call stitches, and it needs to be a painted layer, and we'll leave it at 2K. Go OK, and you'll notice we're in paint mode straight away. But we're actually not going to paint on the handle here. I mean, I could do, but the one trouble with painting on the 3D interface, if you like, is that the brush remains the same size no matter where you are on the layer. So for example, if I let's just make my brush size a bit smaller. So let's say for example I'm something like this, and I've got the handle in perspective, and I paint across the handle like this. Now it all looks the same size there, but when we come round to the side, it's actually bigger here than it was where I started, and so that basically doesn't change. That painting brush size doesn't change no matter where I am. So if I go here and go right away across, you'll see as we go further away, plus I get this, it gets bigger, and plus I get this kind of like stretching across the whole object, which doesn't look nice at all. So the easy way to solve that is to paint on the UV map. But the UV map that's currently visible in the view here is the wrong UV map. It's the active UV map, so we need to change that. So let's go to UV editing, and currently the UV map handle is not active it's not set as the active UV map. You can see here the little highlight on the camera mode. So let's change that just by clicking on the camera, and then we go back to PBR Painter, and actually you don't see it initially, but if we go click off and click back on, then you'll see it there. And so basically we're going to be painting on this section here, but of course everything else is getting in the way a little bit. So to fix that, we'll just tab into edit mode, and I'm just going to go to the Toolbox material and select it, and then press the H button to hide it, and then tab back out and then back to our leather handle and make sure we're still on stitches, and you'll see that all that's remaining in terms of our view is the actual handle. So that's the first thing we do. The next thing we do, currently it's on view mode, but we actually need to be on paint mode, and let's move everything over so we can actually see it better. Let's move things up as well. Before I make this kind of bigger, we need to make some changes on our settings here. So our radius needs to be quite small, so let's set it at 1. We might need it a bit bigger. We are going to leave it white, which it's on. We're going to go to the stroke here, and we're going to change some of the settings here so that when we paint, what we want is a stitching like pattern. So if I just move this over, by the way, a shift and right and middle mouse button allows you to pan in this mode. Middle mouse button wheel allows you to zoom in. So if I paint here like so, you'll see that we've got pretty much solid line, which is what we don't want. So we need to change the settings here and the spacing and the dash ratio, etc., to make it a dashed line. So I've played around with it a little bit. We leave the spacing at 10%, and the dash ratio will take down to 0.75, and the dash samples to 10, and everything else will leave the same. So now as we paint, you'll see we've got this quite a nice stitching effect. A very simple way to achieve it. Whoops. Okay, I thought pressing on Control and Z would actually undo that, but it doesn't. So I'm just going to quickly go on to Erase Alpha, make my brush size a little bit bigger. I don't know why it didn't. Just rub that out. So having set that up, there's one more thing we need to do, and that is just to, which I find helps, is to stabilize our stroke. So if you go on, click on Stabilize Stroke, and I've actually got this set at where it works pretty well for what we need it to do, at 0.927, and what that does is it allows you to kind of have a little bit of a leading edge to your stroke. So I know where we're going to paint. Actually, I've done this before, obviously. So we're going to paint along this line here, and as I start to paint, I click, you'll see this line comes up which allows you to lead. Okay, I need to be on paint. So as I paint, it just allows you to kind of set a better path, if you like, for your stitching. And you'll see here what's already happening. You're getting a very nice stitching effect coming up on your model. So for the rest of this session, I'm really going to be just drawing stitches on my UV map. So I'll kind of speed through it, and then we'll kind of meet up again once I've done all the stitching I need to do. And that's all the stitching I need to do. Now, it's not perfect, but this is going to be a very old handle. You'll notice that I do a lot of stopping, so I only do little chunks at a time. And the reason for that, if anyone's done any sort of painting work before, is that if you do a really good part of it here, and I keep doing it without stopping, and then this one here I mess up, then I have to do the whole lot again. So it's just a good practice to kind of do it in chunks. So that when you mess up, you don't have to redo the whole lot. So that is our stitching done. And if we now come back to our leather, turn our leather back on, we'll see we've just got some very simple white stitching that we've added to our leather. We can actually change the colour here. In fact, I think on my earlier one I did a procedural, so it was kind of a bit more grey than just white, so it's not quite as bright, and I think that the default setting works quite well on that one. It doesn't have to be perfect, like I said. So that's our second layer done, our stitching layer. Okay, so for our next layer, it's going to be an edgeware layer. So let's just create a new layer, and let's call this edgeware. It's actually not really an edgeware, it's actually a wear layer, but for the sake of continuity, I'll keep the name. We're going to use a texture for this, so let's go to Tool Shortcuts and add this fabric, which I'll put a link to once again in the description. So color, normal, roughness, import multiple textures, and we're just going to change a few things actually on here. I'm going to change the colors a bit bright for what I want it to be a lot dirtier. So let's go to adjust hue, saturation and value, and let's halve the value, make it a bit darker, and let's also adjust the curves, and let's pull them down to make them a lot more contrasty. That's good. And then let's also change the texture mapping so that it's on the active UV map, which is good, it's the one we want, which, just to remind you, is the handle one. I've changed it so that actually is active at the moment. And we'll change the scale to say 2 on both of those. That looks pretty good. And the bump mapping on the normal, we'll just take the normal strength down a little bit, it's a bit high. Good. So I think that will do us for our texture. And so now we want a mask to kind of show the leather, sort of wear the leather away to reveal this kind of like fabric underneath. So let's add a new mask and let's make an image texture, and we're going to go new. We'll call this edge tearing. Make it 32-bit float at 4K would be great for this. Okay, and then let's go on to the paint mode and let's start painting. So make sure we're on white, and we're going to literally just create some holes in our fabric here by painting on our mask, painting a mask like so. Now you can start to see that we're seeing our texture through here. If I just turn it on and off, but what we're not getting is our bump layer, so we need to go to the normal and click on layer bump and actually invert those colors so we kind of get this nice edge to our leather. So as we're wearing away our leather here, this is where it's completely kind of worn away, we get this kind of nice kind of outer leather look. Now it doesn't look great at the moment, but once we've added a couple more procedural layers to this mask, we get a really nice effect. So that's kind of all the leather I want to wear away at the ends. Let's do some in the middle as well. Let's just pull those color ramps in just a fraction. The tighter you are when you create these, the sort of less of an edge you'll get. So because the brush is actually a soft brush, if I'm quite a long way away from it, I kind of get this very soft edge to it. But as I get closer, I can make that a bit sharper, which is kind of what I want. Once again, it doesn't look great now, but hopefully it will shortly. I'm not going to do too much to this, because I'm going to add some more masks to it before I come back and play with it. So having done that, that's kind of, you can see how that's kind of wearing the leather away. We're kind of revealing that texture beneath. Now to make it look a lot more believable, we need to add some procedurals to that. So let's add a procedural mask to start off with, and let's change the settings on this mask to a Musgrave. Let's take the scale right up to 39.5, the detail up to 15, the dimensions to 0.7, and we'll leave the lacunarity. And already you can see we're getting this really nice kind of like worn look to it, which is, even that in itself is looks pretty darn good. And so we're not going to end there, we're going to add another one, and this one we're actually going to do is a preset cracks option that Will has included. Click on that and we'll change some of the settings here. The crack scale will change to 49.2, the crack thickness to 3, the crack detail to 9.5, and the crack roughness we'll leave as it is. I think that looks pretty good. So now what we can do is go back to our image texture map here and continue painting. In fact, let's just change this a little bit overkill. Let's change the procedural masks blend modes. So this first one here, this first procedural mask here, just take that up just a fraction. Preset cracks mask I think is a bit overkill. We'll take that down and change that to screen mode. And the procedural mask, I think actually probably multiply would be sufficient. and really you can play with this yourself to see what kind of effects you get. Back to the image texture, if we paint say slightly less white, so it's not actually wearing right the way through, but it just starts to wear the leather, so it kind of indents the leather a little bit. Maybe that's not quite as much as I need. It's a bit whiter. You can see what's happening. So we've still got this nice leather look, but we're just kind of wearing it all over. And a little bit more subtle in places, just to kind of really batter that leather. A little bit less subtle in other places. And I think that will do us for our edge wear. Like I say, you can always go back and continue painting. You can see what it looks like on that mask. It's amazing actually what you can do with just a combination of just a bit of a splodging like I've done here and procedural masks layered on top. So let's move on to our next layer. Okay, so we're almost there, just a couple more layers to go. And the next layer just is called a grunge layer. This is one of my favourites to do because it's so easy to do. Just add a new layer, call it grunge, a fill layer. Let's make the colour black, or actually let's go for a kind of browny colour, just a little bit less reddy brown, something like that. And let's add a mask. Actually, it's still not dark enough. I want it to be completely black. In fact, I kind of want it to be completely rough as well. Like a very dirty, dusty dirt. So let's now add our mask, and of course this is the easy bit because Will has put a preset here called Grunge. Now you need to be in cycles to see this. Make sure your render engine is set to cycles. Click OK and then turn to your render engine cycles viewer, and then let's have a look at the mask and see what it looks like. And that's pretty much it. So it's basically fills up kind of the dark areas with just to allow that dirt on there. It's quite subtle, but that's all it needs to be. Now we need to see it in Eevee, so let's bake that image texture. 2K will be fine for this because it's just dirt. Click OK. And now that's done, we can go to cycles and view it there. And that looks not eCycles, beg your pardon, Eevee. And let's turn that mask off, and we'll see that dirt literally once the shade is compiled. And we might need to just increase our mask by using the mask multiplier. And you can see it makes a difference here. Let's do the same on our roughness. It's subtle, but that's the name of the game. And our very last layer actually is a very simple layer. It's the dust layer, and we've already got this, so we can import that same layer we did from the Toolbox material, and we'll look for it, dust, go OK. That's it. Turn it on. Let's just check what it looks like by clicking the preview mask. Oops, the geometric mask is the one I wanted, and you can see there that's the dust layer. And the good thing about this particular geometric mask, it uses the normal, so I'm not going to drag it around because it looks perfectly good at the moment, but basically if you drag the sphere here, you can change the direction of the normals. But what's so good about this is if I now go to my shape key and use the one I've got set here, you'll see that the dust now still sits on top just like it would, so I haven't had to kind of change anything. And if you go back to this, turn off the masks, and you'll see I've got just a layer of dust sitting on the top there, which doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just to add something, a bit of oldness to the actual handle. And that's it, and we're all done. So let's turn our Toolbox layers back on. And there is our Toolbox complete. So here is the finished item in layout, and I think we've done a pretty good job on the whole. We've got some very nice levels of detail in here, and the rust and the dust and the decals, and I think overall we've done a pretty good job. But of course what's nice about this is that you can turn things off if you don't want to. So for example, if you found that one layer of rust was just a bit too much, let's say that second layer, let's just turn that one off, give it a second to compile, and that still looks quite nice. Prefer it with on, but there you go. So anyway, that's it in a nutshell. So just to finish off, of course, what we need to do is bake our textures down to a PBR texture, a single PBR textures. So there's a couple of things to remember. One main thing to remember actually is that when we're using the UVs here, we need to be on the UV map here. This particular one needs to be selected. I don't know why. It's just I've just been kind of trial and error. So the one we want to bake down to needs to be selected here. And then when we come back to PBR Painter and go to the baking tab, we need to choose the active one and make sure it's the same for both of them on the active. So that's it. So I've already had a go at this. So a couple of things that we need to do. So when you come to it, it will look like this. We choose the save textures externally. I've got somewhere to save them. I've chosen to save it as a PNG file. I'm going to overwrite the existing textures because I've already got some in there. And then when we go to bake it, which I will do now, you've got an option to bake all materials or model, which I've selected as well. And so once again, let's try to click OK. And that's complete. And so essentially we're back where we started. We've still got all our layers intact, nothing's changed. But if we pop over to the shading tab, and I'm going to just duplicate that model, so I've got a kind of a backup, hide my original, and then this toolbox here, let's tab into edit mode, select all with the A button. I'm going to create a new material. Let's call this baked PBR toolbox for now at least, and assign that. And now let's tab back out of edit mode into object mode, and then with the principled BSDF selected, I'm going to use the node wrangler shortcut Control Shift and T to find my textures, and this is a principled texture setup. Select those four, click OK, and there's one thing that for some reason it doesn't do, and that is it doesn't use the right UV map here. So simple fix, delete that one, Shift and A to input UV map. Let's stick that in there instead. Find the main UV map and add that in. That's the easiest. When I say the easiest way, the other way to do it, actually, if I undo all that, go back to where I was. Here is to go to my UV maps and make sure my UV map here is highlighted, and straight away, actually that's definitely the easiest way to do it, you'll see that it now maps correctly onto that actual handle. And just a final note, here are the two boxes side by side, and this is the original toolbox here with the PBR Painter layer still intact, and this is the baked down version. And whilst they do look pretty identical, notice the bump on this one is ever so slightly greater than it is on this one, and so just to finish, what you can do is just increase the strength. I've noticed, and it does a pretty good job of making them look pretty much the same. In fact, a few of the things on this one look better than they do on this one, like the scratches on the baked one seem to have become more prominent. So that's it. So I hope you enjoyed it, this tutorial, and I hope it will encourage you to do your own thing, and it'll be great to see what you can do with PBR Painter for Blender. Take care and God bless.